Hey guys, we got another video for you today. We are actually going to be changing out the long block on a 1973 Super Beetle. So if you're not sure what the long block is, it's the actual engine part of the engine. So you've got your distributor, your fuel pump, your carburetor. So the long block is this piece down here. It's the piece that has all the pistons and the cylinders and all of that. So if you weren't not sure what that is, that's what that is. So we're actually going to be removing everything and then swapping that out. So we'll keep you posted as we go. All right, so the first thing we're going to do is we're actually going to disconnect the battery and then we're going to disconnect the wires that go to the generator here, or the alternator, and then we're going to disconnect all the electrical components from the coil. And one of the things you want to make sure you do as you're doing this is any wires that you disconnect, you want to make sure you label them with a piece of masking tape and a Sharpie. All right, so we've got the battery disconnected and we jacked up the car, because what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to remove the two rear tires. So we jack up the car, put it on jack stands, and now we've got the battery disconnected. So we're going to start disconnecting the alternator cable there and the ignition coil. I'm actually going to try to keep as much together as I can, because I'm putting everything else back on. All I'm doing is replacing the long block, so I'll keep you posted as to what we take off next. All right, so you'll see we got all the wires off the coil, the alternator, and then pulled the spark plug wires off of the distributor here. Again, you're gonna wanna label everything you pull off. It just makes life so much easier when you pull it back on. So labeled every single wire, where it was coming from. I marked the coil left, coil right. That way on the wires I did coil L, coil R, and then pulled the wires off of the choke there for the carburetor and the solenoid there for the carburetor. So all those wires again are marked and with some tape and a marker. So we got the car up, back wheels off, and the gas line on the left side of the vehicle, we've got it clamped off behind the firewall there. So we're gonna disconnect the fuel lines, and then we're gonna pull out the distributor and the fuel pump and my belt there, and you'll see that little notch there. I got to get a new fill-on belt, so I'm gonna pull that off and then we'll check back in with you. Okay, you'll see I got the distributor off and the coil pulled off again, labeled those. I put the distributor in a baggie just to keep it safe. You are gonna have to pull the mounting bracket off the long block here in a minute, but I'll do that in a little bit. What I'm gonna do next is I'm gonna pull off the belt, and then we'll go with the fuel pump, and then we'll check back in with you. All right, you'll notice that we got the fuel pump taken off, the gasket pulled off, the distributor is gone, and what you need to pull off of the long block is the little clamp that holds the distributor on. You're gonna have to put that on your new long block. We got the belt taken off and the off of the alternator there. So our next move is actually going to be to drain the oil from the long block, because I've got an external oil filter here. You'll see the two oil lines there, so I got to pull those off. You won't have that unless you've modified your vehicle. So this step is for those who have an external oil filter. You're gonna drain the oil, pull those off, and then we're gonna remove all the engine tin. The tin is the stuff on the inside down here. So you'll see I've already taken out some of the screws. So this stuff here, you're gonna have to pull all of this out. That way you can actually drop the engine. So we'll pull all that out next. Hey guys, we're back, and so we actually got the oil all drained, and then we actually took the tin off. So you'll see we've got the distributor off, which was just a nut we loosened right here on the distributor, pulled the distributor out, and then there's a clip held on here by another nut. So we pulled that clip off. Took the fuel pump off, just these two nuts here that held it on, pulled that off, and there's a spacer that goes between there. You're gonna wanna save that because that's gonna go on your new long block, and then the down rod that goes inside here that actually pushes on the fuel pump. So you got to pull that down rod out, so you're going to use that in the new long block too. So that's what we've got removed so far. The coil as well. Again, labeling all your wires. And one of the things that I was reading about and was some good information was to, as you pull off nuts for certain areas, put them in a baggie and label them. So what we've been doing is putting them in little Ziploc baggies and labeling them. And so you'll see here we've got external oil filters, and then the screws there. So we've been doing that, and it's going to save us a ton of time in the rebuild. So we're going to remove the generator stand and the alternator next, and then we'll catch up back with you as soon as we do that. All right, so we took off the nuts here, the 4 nuts that hold the generator stand on, and then there's 4 screws that hold this cover for the fan onto the fan shroud that the generator, or well, the alternator in this case, is connected to. We tried to remove that, and it's not coming out, so we're actually gonna go ahead and drop the engine. So let me show you how to do that.
Lie down and scooch way under the engine on your back, parallel with the car, chest even with the oil drain plug, feet out the back. Find the place where the engine connects to the trans, about 4 inches on each side of the center and up 2 inches from the bottom of the engine. You'll find 2 nuts that your 17mm box end will fit on. If the 17mm doesn't fit, you're on the wrong nut.
So you'll see the 2 nuts are right here, and it's a little difficult to see, but you'll see the oil drain pan where the engine connects with the transmission. I have this little bar here that holds the transmission up, and to the right and the left of the transmission you've got 2 nuts. Should be a 17mm nut. So first you're gonna loosen those and pull the nuts off. Again, if you can't get to it, you might have to use the screwdriver to like remove a bunch of the crud. All right, so we're in the back of the fan housing, and we've removed the 2 nuts from underneath the engine, and now you'll see there's one there and there's one over there, and I've got like a piece of firewall stuff that's blocking it, but there's one over there and there's one right here. Those are the 17mm nuts. It's the top nut for your starter, just so you know. So that's the nut that you're going to pull off. That one and that one over there, and that should be, those are the only 4 nuts that are holding your engine to the vehicle. So once you do those, you'll pull, and so we'll get those loosened, and then we'll connect back with you. All right, just a heads up, on the passenger side, the nut that you remove is right behind the fan shroud. So you'll see that 17mm nut. Now on my 73 Super Beetle, on the driver's side, I felt around forever for a nut, couldn't find it, and wound up coming underneath the vehicle. Here's the transmission here, and you'll see the cable here coming in. Just on the other side of this, you'll see a 17mm nut, or bolt actually, that goes all the way through into the engine casing. So search around for the nut on the other side. This is on the driver's side behind the fan shroud. Couldn't find it, so I came down under here, and it's actually a bolt. So 17mm. I had to use a breaker bar, like 2 extensions, and a 17mm socket in order to get to it, but finally got to it, pulled that right out. After you unscrew it, pulls all the way out just like that, and now your 4 bolts are off of the engine, and you're ready to pull it out. All right, well, with some shimmy, shaking, and some pulling, basically you can see we got a motorcycle ATV jack, and we set that on a 2x4 on top of it, and then we set the 2x4 right underneath the oil pan of the engine. and jacked it up a little bit, kind of pull, shake a little, pull, shake a little, and you'll feel it kind of pop out. You gotta lower the jack a little more, shake and pull, and then it pops right out. And there you go. So you'll see we kind of had to jimmy rig our jack stand. Our jack was a little small, so I would recommend you got to get a jack that gets the car up, what is that, 2, 4, 6, 8, at least a good 12 inches. And then so you want to get a really tall jack. We had to tilt the engine back and then pull it out that way because we just couldn't get the car up tall enough and didn't have time to go get a taller jack. So there's the engine taken out, and we're gonna now disassemble it the rest of the way, and we'll check in with you in a second. All right, it's a little dark, gotten a little later today, but so now that we have the engine out, we were able to get to the nut on the back of the alternator, this large nut here, and so we were able to get to that and loosen it in order to pull off the alternator. So we pulled off the alternator and then pulled out the fan, pulled off the alternator stand, and in order to do all of that, we actually had to remove the carburetor from the intake manifold. So here's the intake here, and so we had to remove the carburetor. I was really hoping to keep it all together, but it just seems to work easier if you just take it all apart, and then you're going to redo gaskets anyway and clean it all off, so just take it all apart. So we took those off. I think these are called intake boots. Mine seem to be a little braille, so I'm actually going to be replacing those. I feel like once you've got it all taken apart, you might as well just replace them. Especially if you're putting in a new long block, like to pull it all out, just to take those would be a pain. So so we're doing that now. Now we're just removing the engine tin, which my stuff is pretty frozen on. The little screws, they're just flathead screws, but they're a pain in the butt. So we're just removing those. So we'll be removing the fan shroud next, and then we'll take off the pulley, and then we'll move to the heater channels and exhaust. So we'll check back in with you in a second. All right, well, we are down to the old long block. You'll see everything's taken off. So let me just tell you what we did. We removed the muffler. Found out that was going to be the easiest thing to do. Just remove the muffler, and then the 2 heater channels, removed those on either side, and then the tin that connects the heater channel to the engine block, remove that tin. And you'll see that we actually got all we took the fan shroud off on the top, and then so all that was left was this tin that was covering the cylinders here. There's like some tin, and then this little piece of black tin that went across the back here. And really, honestly, we were able to get some of the screws out. A couple of the other screws, we had to just get a grinder and just grind the heads off. And fortunately, I've got a whole new long block, so what I'm just going to do is I'll just have to pick up a couple of new screws to fit in that area. But that might happen if it freezes on you. Don't freak out. Just get a grinder, grind off the heads, and then pick up some new screws for that. So after we were able to get that engine tin off, then we were able to get the oil cooler off. And so we were able to pull that off. We couldn't get to the nuts underneath. We were able to get the front crankshaft pulley off, and we didn't do that while it was on the car. Looking back, I probably would have done it on the car. You'll see here is your clutch and your flywheel on the back, and my buddy that's been helping me found a spot on the flywheel that has a little hole right here. What he did was he put a larger Allen wrench in there, and it rested up against this bolt. And then I was able to get, actually we used vice grips, but I would use a nut. But we were able to get that on the crankshaft pulley nut, and we were able to loosen that off and pull that all off. So all that's left to remove from our old long block here is the clutch, and then we get to rebuild. Well, I'm not going to say rebuild the new long block, but we get to put all the other stuff on the long block to make it work. So we will show you that process here next. All right, so we've got all of our old pieces off and cleaned currently. We pulled the clutch off of our old long block here, and we are going to be following the instructions of installation on this book here, which I just realized you can't see. It's a John Deere book. This is like critical if you're doing anything with your bug. I would say pick it up, pay $100 if you have to for this book. It is priceless. So we're going to be following the instructions on how to put the engine back together from this book, just because we figure like probably going to be easier. One of the things you must pick up for putting your clutch back in is this little tool. It's $5, but everybody I've talked to says it'll save you, it'll save your life. So what you'll do is you'll put it through here, and that end there actually will fit into this, and it's a clutch alignment tool. So when you're putting it back in, it'll align your clutch, so that way when you try to put your engine back in, your new engine in, it'll all line up. So as we go through the process, we'll keep you posted. All right, so we started on our assembly. Book says to install distributor first, so we did that. And the distributor, now when you install the distributor, you want to make sure it goes all the way down, it seats all the way in. Then we do the fuel pump, so you go gasket, rubber block, gasket, fuel pump. And then the generator stand goes gasket, the silver piece, and let me show you, I forgot to show you this earlier, but when it goes in, these face that direction. Now we tried to actually install it the other direction on the new one, and it wouldn't allow us to do that. The guy I bought the long block from said it should go in this way, but when I went to put it in, it stops it, like it won't actually let it go on. So you have to install it this facing the other direction. So just a heads up on that. So should go that way. So you go paper gasket, this little guy, paper gasket, and then the generator stand on top of that. So we're gonna move on to the next step, so we'll pick up in a second. All right, so I mentioned to you earlier that we had some problems with my oil cooler. I actually took it into the guy, had him look at it. He said it looked really good, and that I didn't need a new one, and he would be the one that I'd be buying it from, so I trusted him. He did say to make sure you put the right seals in between your oil cooler and your block. And then if you'll see inside there, there's 2 seals in there. You need to replace those as well. So if you got a gasket kit, it all came with that. You'll have 4 that are the same, well, 2 that'll fit on here and 2 that'll fit on your long block. So make sure you replace those. And he actually flushed it out for me and cleaned it all up and made it look nice. So you'll see we got our oil cooler on, and then we did our heater channels and our muffler, and so we hooked all those up with the correct gaskets accordingly. And so you want to make sure you fit those on properly, tighten them down. And then we got our engine tin on now, and we'll move from engine tin and start with the rest of the build. So we'll be right back. All right, so we got, you can see we are pretty close to being fully assembled here. We got our intake manifold installed. Make sure you put on the gaskets on both the heat risers. Here, I would suggest changing out the boots, $8 part, and I had mine were recently replaced, but mine were cracked before, and so they're just a pain to get on. or to change out. So once you've got it off, it's just an $8 part, so I would suggest putting those on. So we got the air intake on. Now, it did take a little finagling because of the generator stand. So on the side that has the generator stand, what I did was I slid the boot all the way on to this piece here, and this piece I set on its bolts, lined it up with the pipe, lined the pipes up, and then slid it on that way. That was the easiest way to get it on. The other side, I actually had already connected it and then just slid it right on. So make sure you tighten down the hose clamps there. What I did was I started on one side of the engine, on all the bolts and nuts that I put on, and just worked my way around, making sure everything was nice and tight. So once we did the air intake, we did the fan shroud, and you slide that on right over the oil cooler. Make sure you don't bend the oil cooler. So you slide that right on. And little word to the wise, what I did was I held one hand on this piece that goes through the tin, because my tin was already on, and just kind of like finagled it through the hole there. And then just a little tip here, if you get the 2 bolts on either side of the fan shroud started, then they're already in there. And these pipes, because these pipes are really hard on the right side, it's not too bad. You got some clearance, but on the left side, man, there is like hardly any clearance at all. So I had actually put the fan shroud on and tried to start this and lost the washer down in here. So I had to take everything apart, pull out that washer, which was a pain, took me a while. So then I got smart. What I did was I started these bolts on the fan shroud first when it was off, and then slid it on to the long block, onto the oil cooler, and then tightened those down, and that worked out really well. So then I installed my pulleys and my fan belt, so I got that all set up, and my spark plug wires. Again, make sure that you've got this firing in the right order. It should be 1, 4, 3, 2. Your cylinder should be firing it. So 1 back there, 2 is here, 3 is there, 4 is here. So attach the corresponding spark plug wires. And then you'll see I got my coil on, and I had labeled all my coils, or all my wires on my coil, so I knew exactly where those went, so get those hooked up. So I'm gonna install the carburetor now, and then we'll catch in back up with you. All right, we are back, and we've got our carburetor on and our air filter, and we've attached all the corresponding wires. I have this wire that goes to this solenoid there, and then the wire that goes to the choke. So yours might be different, but if that's what you have, get those wired up, and we are ready to throw her back in the car. The book I have does mention to test your starter, so what I did was I put the negative and positive terminals on the battery, rolled underneath the car, and touched a screwdriver to the 2 posts, and made sure that it turned over. So you want to do that while you have the engine out, because it's just a lot easier to get to the starter if it's bad. So we're gonna go in reverse order, put this back in. So we'll check back in with you in a second. All right, we got the engine back in the vehicle. Now, just one note, I was doing this by myself at the end. I had a buddy helping me at the beginning. I highly advise having someone helping you, but doing it by myself at the end was a little bit of trouble. Lifting up the car with a jack, and I actually purchased this jack here. It's an ATV motorcycle jack, and placed the engine on that, and there's just no way getting around it, but you gotta lower the car, lift the engine, lower the car, lift the engine, got to get everything lined up perfectly. So it just takes some maneuvering. Just have patience, take the time to do it right. My boss always used to say, take the time to do it right the first time. Once you get it all squared away, you'll get the the bottom bolts of the engine lined up with their holes there and there. Once you get them lined up, you're gonna twist the generator here, and what that's gonna do, it's gonna move your flywheel in order for it to line up with the transmission. So you'll have to twist this a little and push the engine in, twist this a little, push the engine in, and it'll slide right through. Once you get everything all lined up, it'll slide in. And then you get underneath, you tighten the two nuts on the bolts down below, and then you tighten the nut on the back here on the passenger side, and then you put the bolt in on the driver's side. Then once you get all the bolts all tightened down as tight as you can get them, then you come back in and your wiring harness, you put wire those wires up. So I again labeled these oil and coil left, so I had marked my coil left, and then your alternator wires, and then hook up your gas line. I actually replaced the fuel line just to again be on the safe side. So we're gonna spin this around a few times, get some oil moving around in the engine, and then we're gonna fire her up. All right, so got the battery hooked up, and one of the things that I didn't realize was that when you bring your throttle cable through, so you want to get it started while the engine is down on the ground, get it started, and then as you get the engine in more and more in place, you want to feed it through. And then what you want to do is feed it through and then hook it up, because my throttle cable actually got caught between the transmission and the engine, and so I actually had to loosen the 4 bolts, pull it away just a hair, just enough to pop it out, and then redo it. So you want to make sure to avoid that. Feed the throttle cable through, hook it up before you get all the bolts on and squared away, and then tighten down all your engine mounting nuts and bolts. After you're done with that, then throw the heater channels on. You see here I put in some new heater hoses, and once you've done that, set the timing, crank this around a couple times, get some oil moving, and start her up.